Choosing a weapon in Monster Hunter Wilds is a lot like choosing a class in a traditional action RPG. They each come with a very particular playstyle and individual nuances that may fit certain players like a glove and others like a square peg in a round hole. So before you make the all-important decision about what weapons to spend your time and hard-earned resources on, here's a quick guide breaking down all of them, along with a quick overview of their playstyles. The Greatsword is all about big, charged up, and monstrous hits that come at the expense of your mobility and speed. While some other big, heavy weapons still let you move relatively quickly while wielding them, when you're using the Greatsword, you're just about as slow as you can be. This is why if you plan on using this weapon, you'll need to learn how to play around your mobility limitations. Fortunately, the Greatsword has some great options for that. There's a very useful tackle ability that can be used both out of a roll and out of a charge, which not only can super armor through enemy attacks, but also slightly stun a monster and put yourself in a better position to land a big charged attack. If that's not enough, you can also just stand your ground and block. If you manage to block certain attacks with perfect timing, they'll trigger a power clash, which can knock down a monster and leave you in a prime position to land your strongest charged attack. Finally, the Greatsword also comes with one very easy to access offsetting attack that can power through and counter a monster attack if used at just the right time. But what's really cool about the Greatsword in Wilds is that thanks to the focus mode, you can now aim your charge slashes while you're charging them. No longer will you be stuck in a direction if you started charging before orienting yourself towards the monster. Nearly all the way on the opposite end of the spectrum is the Sword and Shield, which is a playstyle that is defined by very quick hits with a bunch of mobility options that allow you to move while attacking, and even leap up onto monsters, giving you the opportunity to mount them, open wounds, and deal big damage. Its shield, though small, is still capable of perfect guards and counters and can even initiate power clashes too. In addition to being very versatile and offering great offensive and defensive options, the Sword and Shield is one of the more pick-up-and-play friendly weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds. There are of course nuances that you'll need to learn in order to squeeze out as much damage as possible with these weapons, but if you're brand new to Monster Hunter and just want a traditional weapon that lets you just go in, mash a button a whole bunch and still have decent success, the Sword and Shield is a great pick. The Sword and Shield's most powerful moves are by getting the right, very simple combo in to unleash a powered-up charged chop. Power it up by pressing triangle or Y 4 times, or by using the stronger circle or B 3 times, either stationary or while moving, to then be able to do the buffed version of the charged chop by holding triangle and circle or Y and B at the same time. Sprinkle in a spinning reaper between those combos and the charged chop for even more DPS. And because the charge chop is a multi-hitting attack, it's great at applying elemental damage or status ailments. At a higher level, you're going to be using backsteps both to dodge monsters' attacks and to put you into a stance that will allow you either to do a scaling slash that will launch you up into the air for either a falling slash, a falling shield bash, or a falling multi-hitting stab, depending on whether you're going for straight physical damage or a mount. You can also launch into a perfect rush attack which rewards you for perfect timing with more damage. Ultimately, the Sword and Shield is a jack-of-all-trades type of weapon. It's got solid damage, good mobility, its attacks are quick, it can do both slashing and blunt damage, it can block, and has a perfect guard and counter attack. It's got easy to use button mashy combos, and perhaps the most underrated aspect of the weapon class, you can use items without having to put your weapon away. This makes using items like life powder super easy so you can save your teammates in a pinch. Do you like the idea of a Greatsword, but would prefer a bit more mobility while charging your giant bonk stick? If so, the hammer will be the weapon for you. Like the Greatsword, the hammer benefits greatly from charging up its attacks, but unlike the Greatsword, you're able to freely move around and even use your grappling hook to dodge out of the way, all while still keeping your charge held. Part of the skill of using the hammer is knowing when to charge all the way to level 3 for a big, devastating single hit, when to stop at level 2 to launch into a combo that you can roll out of and reset if the situation calls for it, and when to hold the third hit of a combo down so you can time a powerful offsetting upward slash to counter an enemy's attack. The hammer also does entirely blunt damage, making it a great weapon to stun monsters, giving you an opportunity for a hugely satisfying mighty charge slam for enormous damage. Ultimately, the hammer is a weapon that maintains the hugely destructive power of some of the other large weapon types, loses the ability to block, but gains speed and mobility thanks to the ability to dodge while maintaining a charge.
Power up, activated!
If you prefer a defensive playstyle that encourages a lot of blocking and parrying enemy attacks, you won't find a better fit than the Lance. Like the Greatsword, you won't be moving very fast while you've got this weapon out, outside of its dashing attack, but to make up for that lack of mobility, you gain the ability to stand your ground and quickly shift between poking and blocking. The Lance has two very simple 3-hit stab combos, one that hits straight ahead and another that hits at a 45-degree angle. This makes it a uniquely precise weapon, able to target specific weak points with a bit more accuracy. But the big thing is that in between any of those quick stabs, you can quickly pull up your shield by pressing the right trigger. If you get good with this weapon, you'll know when to attack, when to block, when to go for the big damage triple stab combo ender, and when to instead go for the counter thrust combo ender to power through an attack to deal a bunch of extra damage. The Lance also has several tools to get into a fight to make up for its slow movement speed. You can charge right into a battle with a dashing attack that can end with a powerful thrust, or you can jump out of this dash for a leaping attack that can even mount monsters. The Switch Axe is a bit more mechanically complex than many other weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds, but once you understand what its various gauges and forms are for, it becomes much more approachable. For those completely new to this style of weapon, essentially you have two different forms, axe form and sword form. Axe form has a bit better range and better mobility thanks to better rolls and run speed, but its attacks are generally slower and deal less damage compared to sword form. By dealing damage to a monster while in axe form, you build up your switch gauge, and once it fills past the thin white line, you'll be able to switch to sword form. While in sword form, your attacks will drain your switch meter, but fill another meter called the amp meter. Once you fill the amp meter, you will also refill your switch meter, deal extra elemental explosion damage with every hit, depending on what file type your weapon uses, and gain access to special attacks, like the full release slash by pressing the right trigger, triangle or Y, and circle or B all at the same time, and the zero sum discharge, a powerful technique that lets you mount an enemy and explode your weapon right on their body. Essentially, the gameplay style of the Switch Axe has you building up the switch meter in axe form, swapping to sword form to fill the amp meter, working to land one of your big damage finishing attacks while in sword form, and then repeating the process once you need to build up your switch meter again. Of course, there's a bit more to it than that, as you'll probably want to swap back to axe form every now and then to utilize its better range and movement options, but that's the general flow of how the Switch Axe works. It's also worth noting that while it lacks a bit in the way of defensive options, it does have two counter moves, one in each form. In axe form, pressing triangle or Y and circle or B at the same time will perform an offsetting rising slash, and in sword form, pressing right trigger and triangle or Y at the same time will perform a counter rising slash. The Insect Glaive remains one of the more complex weapon options, but it's also one of the coolest looking once you figure it out. It's made up of two parts, a long staff with a blade at one end that you'll use to slice up monsters and vault through the air, and a bug called the Kinsect that you can command to deal additional damage while collecting various buffs from your enemies. Your Kinsect is really a support player compared to the Glaive itself, which has a very quick-hitting and mobility-focused moveset. In addition to using wide-sweeping attacks on the ground, it's unique in that it lets you easily pop yourself up and attack from the skies, even bouncing off a monster multiple times to stay airborne if you land consecutive attacks. That's great for shredding the wings of flying foes and makes it particularly easy to mount monsters consistently.
Got it on the ground!
The behavior of your attacks can also change depending on which of the three timed buffs you've collected with your Kinsect, each of which is gathered from a different part of the monster. Part of the challenge is learning to quickly use your Kinsect to collect those buffs and fully power yourself up, increasing your stats and giving you access to stronger charged attacks for the Glaive. From there, you can use your Winged Buddy to either deal some additional damage alongside your swings while in focus mode, or mark a monster to have it automatically attack them while leaving behind dust clouds you can detonate with a hit. These have a variety of effects, depending on which Kinsect you choose to use, from straight-up explosions to poison bursts to paralysis clouds and even healing mists. So while learning to juggle your Kinsect commands with the regular dodging and swinging of your Glaive can be a bit to wrap your head around at first, the reward for doing so is a flashy and fast moveset that feels quite distinct from any of Monster Hunter's other weapons. If getting up close isn't your thing and you'd prefer to hang back and flex your aiming skills and monster weakness knowledge, you'd be right at home with the heavy bowgun. The playstyle here is very easy to describe. Pull out your weapon, aim down sight, shoot a couple of shots, and be ready to either dodge or block the monster's attack when they get tired of getting shot at. Of course, there's a bit more to it than that, like having to learn and manage up to 18 different types of ammo, knowing monster weaknesses so you're aiming at the most optimal parts of the monster, and knowing when to switch to ignition mode. Ignition mode is an alternate firing mode that allows you to fire your heavy bowgun's special ammo. What special ammo you can fire depends on how you've customized your bowgun in your equipment menu. Going to the customized bowgun menu allows you to choose from Wyvern Heart Ignition, which lets you fire rapid fire like a machine gun, Wyvern Piercer Ignition, which fires a single powerful shot, Wyvern Counter Ignition, which gives the heavy bowgun a charged offsetting counterattack, and Wyvern Blast Ignition, which lobs splitting explosive projectiles. It's also worth mentioning that when using the heavy bowgun, you have an auto guard if you just stand still and take an attack from the front. However, if you properly time a manual guard, done by pressing triangle or Y and circle or B at the same time, you can initiate a clash and cash in some great offense from your well-timed defense. The longsword has long been one of Monster Hunter's most popular weapons, and it's not too hard to see why. For one, you get to use giant fancy katanas, which feels badass right from the get-go. In addition to that surface level appeal, the playstyle of the longsword is one that's easy to pick up and mash buttons on, with several layers of added depth that you'll need to unravel to bring out the full strength of the weapon. Basically, the longsword is a weapon where you have a side objective as you're fighting the monster. You want to get your sword powered up to level 3 to unlock your strongest attacks and turn the weapon into a killing machine. To do that, you'll first need to fill a spirit gauge by landing attacks. By filling the gauge, you'll be able to use spirit blade attacks with the right trigger, which deplete the gauge every time they're used. In order to level up your weapon, you'll need to connect with a final hit of a spirit blade combo called the Spirit Round Slash. When you do, you'll see a white glow around the spirit gauge, which will mean that you're at level 1. Next time you do it, the gauge will get a yellow glow. If you manage to do it a third time, the gauge will turn red, granting you access to all new, more powerful moves, including an extremely powerful Helmbreaker attack and follow-up finisher, which unfortunately drains your gauge. What makes the longsword a bit of a tricky weapon to wield is the fact that monsters typically will not just sit around and let you land 4 hits of a combo to level up your weapon, which is why you'll also need to be good about using its built-in leveling shortcuts, like breaking wounds or landing its counterattack, the Foresight Slash, which must be used in the middle of a combo. If it successfully counters, you'll fill your spirit gauge and have an opportunity to follow up directly with a Spirit Round Slash to level the weapon up. If it doesn't counter, your spirit meter will be left empty. Ultimately, the longsword is a high-risk, high-reward type of weapon that is more complex than it may initially seem, but it's definitely worth learning its many intricacies. The dual blades are the fastest melee weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds. Because of this, they hit for significantly less per hit than you might be used to, but allow for quick and agile play, allowing you to pepper the enemy with hundreds of tiny cuts. Because of the quick attack speed, the dual blades is probably the best weapon at applying element damage and status ailments. It does require a bit of relatively simple stamina and gauge management to get the most damage out of it, and its combos aren't as forgivably cancelled like the sword and shields, but when you've mastered it, you'll be zipping around slashing wildly as if you were a demon, and executing focus strikes on wounds that make you look like you're using ODM gear straight out of Attack on Titan. Using the dual blades is a dance of always being in the preferable demon mode or archdemon mode. Enter demon mode at will with R2, which will make you glow red and switch up your stance. Demon mode drains stamina in exchange for super quick attack speed, a damage boost, and slidey sidesteps instead of your standard roll dodges. As you land hits, you build up the demon gauge, which you can expend by doing the flashy and powerful blade dance with triangle and circle or Y and B at the same time. But be careful, because while you won't get knocked back during this attack, you will take damage and you can't cancel it. You can also exit demon mode at will, and if the demon gauge is full, exit into archdemon mode. Archdemon mode isn't as powerful or quick as demon mode, but you get a slight damage boost, the assassin-y dodge, and a different moveset that allows you to strike with blade dance and then repeatedly tap R2 to unleash an incredibly fast demon flurry, which expends demon gauge. This balancing act of being demon mode as much as possible and having archdemon mode as a backup when you run out of stamina is the bread and butter concept of the dual blades. Finally, when in Demon or Archdemon mode, a perfect evade will perform a Demon dodge, temporarily granting Demon boost, a big attack speed and damage buff that also makes it so you attack every time you evade for a short time. This buff is even bigger when kicked off in Demon mode. Getting the hang of maintaining Demon mode, perfecting those Demon dodges, and knowing when to unleash those powerful Demon Dance flurries will turn you into a deadly fast hunter in no time. The Hunting Horn may look like a simple Great Hammer weapon archetype to a Monster Hunter newcomer, but the reality is far more unique and interesting. It's actually a pseudo-support weapon that is designed around playing melodies to trigger empowering buffs, along with absolutely bonking the brains out of monsters. The way it works is that each Hunting Horn comes with a selection of songs that you'll see listed in the top right of the screen. Each note is tied to one of your attack buttons. So in this example, white notes are tied to triangle or Y, blue notes are tied to circle or B, and green notes are tied to triangle or Y and circle or B at the same time. By entering the notes that correspond to a particular song, you will store it for whenever you decide to perform that song. To perform a song, all you have to do is press the right trigger and you'll perform the next one that's queued up. If you want to play a specific song, you can do that simply by pressing the combination of buttons that correspond to it. Once you start performing, you can either move on to the next song in the queue by pressing the right trigger again, or you can press triangle or Y and circle or B at the same time to perform an encore and empower just the one song that you played. If you have the time, you can even go through all 3 songs by pressing the right trigger 3 times, and then do an encore to enhance all 3 of those buffs. You'll know when a buff is at its max level when it turns purple in the top right of the screen. Finally, you can also drop echo bubbles by pressing right trigger and X or A at the same time. The effect of an echo bubble will change from Hunting Horn to Hunting Horn, but they will generally provide a passive buff to anyone standing within its radius, in addition to also adding on some extra damage with every attack as well. You can see how many echo bubbles you have by checking the little circles on the left side of the screen. There's a lot going on with the Hunting Horn, but the situational buffs that it can equip you with, along with the insane damage it can put out, makes it one of the most formidable weapons in your arsenal. The Gunlance is a weapon that balances very powerful and explosive offensive techniques with very low mobility and a bunch of different meters to manage and maintain. It's a complicated weapon that relies on lengthy looping combos to squeeze out as much damage as you can out of your opportunities to do damage. In a nutshell, the Gunlance needs to bounce between doing 5 things: melee attacking, shelling, reloading, guarding, and using shortcuts to unleash its most powerful attacks. There are 3 icons underneath your health bar that represents the Gunlance's various ammo types. The rightmost ammo icon is for your standard shelling bullets. You can use this to follow every one of your melee attacks for an extra explosion of damage, and you can also use them on their own, along with a direction to stay mobile while blasting straight ahead of you. The second icon in the middle is for your Wormstake cannon, which can be used with a Wormstake full blast after a wide sweep. This will get lodged into an enemy, dealing a bunch of continuous damage before exploding in a big blast. And finally, you have the Wyvern's Fire gauge, which tells you how many times you can use the Gunlance's ultimate attack, Wyvern's Fire. This attack is performed by pressing the right trigger, triangle or Y, and circle or B at the same time. If performed after doing a Wormstake full blast, you'll actually be able to perform it much faster. All of this just scratches the surface and doesn't even cover the 3 different types of Gunlances in the game. Needless to say, if you want a weapon with a steep but satisfying difficulty curve and lots of cool explosions, the Gunlance might be up your alley. If the thought of the heavy bowgun sounds exciting, but you also value mobility and are willing to sacrifice a bit of damage, the light bowgun might be more your speed. Fundamentally, it's very similar to the heavy bowgun, with a playstyle that largely involves just strafing around a monster, taking shots whenever you can, aiming for weaknesses, and utilizing the right ammo type for the job. The biggest difference here is while the light bowgun is mobile, it cannot guard like the heavy bowgun. Instead of the heavy bowgun's ignition mode, the light bowgun instead has rapid fire mode, which allows you to fire specific ammo types rapidly, as you might imagine. There's a meter above the ammo counter that shows how much more you can fire in rapid fire mode, with that meter refilling both over time and as you deal damage. You're also able to move around very quickly while firing in rapid fire mode by using burst steps, which can be done by pressing a direction and the X or A button after firing while aiming down sight. Also like the heavy bowgun, pressing triangle or Y and circle or B at the same time will swap over to a special ammo type, which can either be adhesive ammo that can be shot into a monster and will explode over time, or a wyvern blast, which can be planted into the ground and will explode when a monster moves over to it, or when you shoot a shot near it. And finally, you can also follow up any of the light bowgun's regular attacks with a chaser, which adds an additional shot for the price of 1 bullet. The Charge Blade is the weapon for hunters who want to not only deal tons of damage, but also have the ability to block or parry monster attacks and take advantage of the new Power Clash feature. This extraordinary versatile, strong, and cool kit comes at the cost of learning what is commonly regarded as the most technical, complicated of the Monster Hunter weapons. There's a lot going on with this weapon, and even when you've learned the basics, there is even more to master. But let's try to break down the basics as best we can. First off, the core idea of the Charge Blade is that you attack while in the faster sword form to fill up these files underneath the health bar. When you see these files are glowing red, and your sword glowing as if it'll melt at any moment, you filled them up to their max and must now charge them by holding the right trigger and pressing circle. Continuing to attack while the files are fully charged will cause the sword to bounce off a monster, but attacking again immediately after the first bounce will also charge. You can also always charge before it gets to this point, but it won't fill all your files at once. Once the files are stored, noted by these file icons, you can either use them to power up your shield by holding right trigger and holding circle or B, your sword by holding right trigger, tapping circle or B, then holding triangle or Y. Or you can morph into axe form by holding right trigger and pressing triangle or Y, and go for the big damage, but you should probably charge your shield first. Powering up your shield is important when using the Charge Blade, as it will enhance your guard and also allow you to perform one of the axe's big finishing attacks, the Super Amped Element Discharge. Powering up your sword will enhance it with that particular Charge Blade's element and prevent your sword from deflecting on a monster's hide. But the ultimate goal is to use your files while in axe mode after charging your shield, because that's where the real damage potential of the weapon lies. Pressing circle or B will use powerful elemental discharges that each use up a single file, while your two big attacks while in axe form are amped element discharge, performed by pressing triangle or Y and circle or B at the same time, which also takes one file to use, but can be followed up by pressing the same two buttons again for the aforementioned super amped element discharge, which empties all remaining files. Got it? There's more. Succeeding at a perfect guard in sword mode will let you counter with a powerful savage axe with triangle or Y. Some attacks in sword mode will automatically guard too, called a guard point colloquially. Finally, hitting a wound with the focus slash, double rend, will unlock power axe mode, which lessens file usage and just looks really cool. One of the trickiest parts of the Charge Blade is knowing when to swap between its axe and sword forms, but once you get the hang of it, the Charge Blade is an incredibly versatile weapon that can sever, break, stun, and knock down monsters regularly. If all that sounds good, and you don't mind a fairly long learning curve, especially to master everything it has to offer, then the Charge Blade might be the weapon for you. The bow is the most mobile of the ranged weapons and can hit surprisingly hard when in the right hunter's hands. The bow can also look cool as hell, especially when using its impressive homing focus strikes or flashy dragon piercer. It appears deceivingly simple. Aim, shoot, dodge, but remembering to manage all of its abilities consistently to optimize your damage output can be kind of a lot. At the surface level, the bow uses stamina to both shoot and use a charging sidestep, which acts as your dodge when holding L2 to aim. You can hold R2 to charge, but each shot and charging sidestep builds up your bow's charge too. The higher the charge, the more arrows you'll shoot, and without a special equipment skill, that's capped at 3. You can do a charging sidestep between shots to maintain your current charge level, otherwise it'll cycle back to 1. If you run too low on stamina, you'll be unable to dodge when you need it most, so keeping track of your stamina is paramount. Luckily, if you time a charging sidestep well enough when a monster attacks, you'll perform a discerning dodge, recovering your stamina to full so you can shoot to your heart's content. The stamina management and charge level is the core of what you need to consider, but there are also coatings and tracer arrows. Build the trick arrow gauge by attacking, then consume it to apply tracer arrows or coatings. Hold R2 and then square or Y to dock a tracer, then shoot as normal to stick it into the monster, knowing that the higher the charge, the more powerful the tracer's effects. Your next arrows will home to the tracer and deal additional damage until it explodes. Apply coatings with triangle or Y when your bow is drawn. Each bow comes with a variety of coatings and is adept at applying status ailments with them. The bow's focus strike is called Focus Fire Hailstorm, and it lives up to its flashy name. You can lock onto a monster's wounds and all the tracers, dealing a ton of damage. Charge to level 3 to increase damage and unleash a devastating follow-up attack that flinches most monsters. There's a lot more to know about the special attacks of the bow, like the Arc Shot, Dragon Piercer, Mobile Flying Swallow Shot, and more, but learn that at your own pace. The bow is for anyone who wants to play a risky game of keep away with a monster while taunting it from just out of reach. It can feel simple when you first pick it up, but it's got a relatively high skill ceiling that feels amazing when you get it right.
The tail's on fire!
That was a lot, but that's our guide covering all 14 weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds. Hopefully, you have a better understanding of how each of the weapons work and can make an informed decision on which ones you want to put your time and resources into. Thanks for watching, and for more Monster Hunter Wilds guides, check out our growing wiki on IGN.com, along with our video covering things the game doesn't tell you. And for everything else, keep it here at IGN.